My name is Emily. I'm a 28-year-old housewife living with my husband, David, who is 2 years older, and his mother. David's father passed away a few years ago, so it's just the three of us. David and I met through a matchmaker. I seriously started considering marriage after my best friend from college had a baby. In the city, being single at my age isn't unusual, but in my small town, traditional values are still strong, and almost everyone around me was married. Feeling hopeless about my job and life, I quickly agreed to meet a matchmaker suggested by a helpful acquaintance. When I first met David, my impression was that he seemed kind. Being the same age, we had a lot to talk about, and our marriage was quickly decided. Being the only son in a small town, there was an expectation from the matchmaker and everyone around us that we would live with his mother, and I didn't resist the idea. It wasn't a passionate, dramatic love, but with each date, I was drawn to David's reliability and kindness, and I looked forward to our life together. But here's the thing. I was just living an ordinary life, and now I find myself in a dramatic marriage. I thought stories of a sweet husband and Mill turning nasty right after the wedding were just TV dramas or internet gossip. I never imagined it would happen to me. At first, it was just little critiques about my cooking or housekeeping. Even though I rushed into marriage without having much skill in housework, I took my Mill's comments as advice and followed them obediently. I believed that all the things she said were out of love. As an adult, you rarely get such attention. You should appreciate the advice while you're getting it. I thought it was a blessing and tried my best, clumsily but earnestly. I believed that if I could manage everything well, I would build a bond with my Mill like a real parent-child relationship. I thought she would no longer have to worry about things if I did everything correctly. However, the harder I tried, the worse things got. My efforts only seemed to inflate my Mill's demands. Even when I cooked according to her instructions, she'd say it tasted terrible. When I folded the laundry the way she told me, she'd criticize me and refold it right in front of me. I never expected all my efforts to be rewarded, but I having them dismissed so bluntly right before my eyes was deeply hurtful. As for my husband, David, he believed a man shouldn't interfere in women's matters and held his mother as the gold standard for everything. He would criticize and mock me for not being able to do things like his mother. If his mother said my cooking was bad, David would join in and make fun of me, proudly watching his mother cook his favorite meals while sneering at me. He'd say, "Mom's cooking is the best. You should learn to be like her," followed by a lecture. And then, the lecture always begins. "You should be grateful I married you. You don't have any appreciation for the food and home you've been given. If you were grateful, you'd be better at everything by now." When David was in a bad mood, he'd yell the same things at me, making me sit on my knees while he and my Mill scolded me for hours, sometimes late into the night. Living like this, I started losing weight, and my skin broke out terribly. My Mill's harassment escalated since I never talked back. Lately, she's been demanding grandkids daily. After her rants, she'd always say, "Is there something wrong with you?" It was unbelievable. Right after we got married, she'd spy on our bedroom, and lately, she's been interfering in our intimate matters from morning till night, with David joining her in mocking and berating me. How could I possibly have a child in such an environment? I do want a child, but when I thought about it, a question popped into my mind. A child. With who? Do I want David's child? Do I want to have a child with him? As soon as I asked myself that, the answer was a resounding no. No way. I don't want that Mill to be the grandmother of my child. That's it. I'm not happy at all. When I realized my true feelings, I suddenly blacked out. I was in a hospital bed when I woke up. Apparently, I collapsed from severe stress and overwork. I ended up being hospitalized for 5 days. My Mill and David, who rushed over from work, were bowing their heads to the doctor and nurse. Seeing that, I felt a bit happy, thinking David was worried about me. But after the doctor and nurse left the room, David turned to me and said coldly, "So, what about dinner?" Following him, my Mill said with an exasperated tone, "Honestly, you're not only useless, but now you've caused this trouble too." Then David laughed and said, "Must be nice, huh? I want to be hospitalized too. 3 meals and naps. Why do you get to live in luxury? You're a housewife. It's the same at home. Stop wasting money on hospitalization and just rest at home. Who do you think is paying for this?" That's true. I want to be hospitalized too. Training you has worn me out. I'm exhausted every day because of you. You should get discharged immediately and do the housework. Should we take her home now? She's acting like a spoiled kid. If I talked about stress, I'd be hospitalized every day with my work. Plus, my wife is causing all this trouble by being hospitalized. Man, I want to be hospitalized too. Why don't you switch with me? I need a break. Sounds good. Hey, why don't you go to work while I rest? Oh wait, you're useless. They were laughing, thinking they were joking, but being unable to move, their eyes looking down at me were genuinely terrifying. I feared they might actually do something to me when a young nurse walked in. It's late, and Emily is tired. There are more tests tomorrow, so please leave, the nurse said firmly but gently, and worried about appearances. David and my meal quietly left. Thank you. When I thanked the nurse, she smiled kindly and said, "You have it tough," with a sympathetic look. She must have overheard the conversation, I thought. The hospital room was surprisingly quiet after lights out. Normally, it might feel a bit eerie, but I was grateful for the peace. I felt liberated from that house. Slowly, I closed my eyes and reflected on my life so far. Did I really want to get married? Was I just lonely and frustrated because all my friends were married, always talking about their kids and husbands, and I felt left out? Did I rush into marriage out of childish rebellion against my parents? In a situation like this, most people would talk to their parents or ask for help, but I had a strained relationship with mine and couldn't tell them the truth. I came from a relatively wealthy family and was what you'd call a sheltered daughter. Raised by strict parents, I felt suffocated by their love as a teenager and dreamed of leaving home. I envied my classmates who dressed up, wore makeup, and hung out with boys, but I didn't have the courage to join them and just studied as my parents told me to. So when I arranged my own match and found David, my parents were strongly opposed. Their opposition triggered my long-standing rebellion, and I married David despite their objections. The aunt who introduced David to me got a lot of grief from my parents, which also fueled my anger toward them. Determined to cut ties with my parents, I only had a photo wedding. Given all that, I couldn't turn to my parents for help. Reflecting slowly on myself, I felt ashamed of my naivety, and deep regret overwhelmed me. During my hospitalization, David never visited. Any faint hope I had left in my heart disappeared completely, and I was unsure if I should go back to the house where they were waiting for me. On the day of discharge, as I packed my things and stepped out of the lobby, my legs gave way, and I crouched down. If I go back, things might get even worse. I might never be able to leave that house again. I'm terrified to go back. I don't want to go back. I'm scared. The nurse who had been looking after me hurried over and gently rubbed my trembling back. At that moment, I sensed someone standing in front of me. Slowly lifting my head, my eyes widened in surprise. Mom. There stood my parents. Why? My mom looked at me worriedly. Are you okay? Let's get in the car. She gently put her arm around my shoulder. Thanking the nurse, I got into my dad's car with my mom's support. My parents' house hadn't changed at all, and a wave of nostalgia washed over me. We got a call from your mill. Why were you staying in that house for so long? Mom scolded me, but I saw tears in her eyes. Seeing that, I couldn't hold back my emotions and cried, clinging to her chest. The call from my mill was a complaint about me and to my parents. She has no sense of being a wife. She can't support David and can't even do housework properly. And now she's hospitalized? And for stress? What if the neighbors get the wrong idea? Stress is just an excuse for being spoiled and selfish. What kind of upbringing did you give her? Until she properly reflects on her actions, she won't set foot in our house again. Make sure you re-educate her and then have her apologize to us. My mom realized everything from this one-sided and outrageous call and came to get me. When I told my mom everything that had happened, she sighed, unable to hide her anger. I thought I was grown up and could handle everything myself, but in the end, I just ended up causing trouble for my parents. I'm sorry, I said sincerely to my parents. It's okay now. My mom hugged me. We're sorry too, for treating you like a child for so long. We should have trusted you more. We're sorry. It was the first time my parents and I truly understood each other. That evening, we had hamburgers, my favorite dish from childhood. It was a bit awkward, but my parents didn't mention my in-laws, and we had a pleasant meal. I took a long, relaxing bath and slept soundly in my old room. Of course, things couldn't stay like this. The next morning, when I woke up, my resolve was firm. I told my parents, who were already up and ready, about my decision to divorce. First, wash your face. My mom smiled and then turned serious. If that's your decision, we need to prepare too, right dear? She looked at my dad. That's right, my dad said, putting down his newspaper. Go wash your face and get ready. I could only give a weak reply to my mom's determined look. 1 week after staying at my parents' house, on Sunday morning, the doorbell rang loudly. On the monitor, I saw my Mill and David, both with furious expressions. Fear surged back, and I gasped, but my mom calmly answered and unlocked the door. She gave me a light pat on the back and said, "You haven't done anything wrong, so stand tall." I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and faced them. My Mill and David barged into the living room, sat down heavily, and glared at us with their arms crossed. "What's the meaning of this? How long are you going to stay without apologizing? This is absurd. The hospital bills aren't cheap, and you're neglecting the house. Back in the day, you would have been divorced already. Do you understand?" My Mill ranted. David nodded along. Watching her rant, my mom calmly said with a smile, "You're right. We think that's best too. Let's proceed with the divorce." My Mill glared at her. "Oh, is that so? Then we'll be demanding compensation. Despite educating Emily, she's caused us so much stress and trouble." Educating, you say? Is bullying someone to the point of hospitalization your idea of education? That's. As the tension rose, my dad cleared his throat, creating a brief silence. "Well, my David is handsome, compassionate, and kind, and he's a guaranteed success. Of course, he's popular, and he's already hitting it off with a lovely girl from a good family that I like. I'd treat her like my own daughter." My Mill looked smug, as if she had delivered a final blow. But my dad's next words changed everything. "Are you saying David is seeing someone other than Emily?" My dad shot a sharp glance at my Mill, but she didn't notice at all. "That's right. The girl is very enthusiastic too. She's a perfect match for our handsome and talented David." She kept digging her own grave, unaware of the gravity of her words. "I understand. Then I'll have our lawyer contact you later. Let's leave it at that for today." My dad then looked at David and said, "David, say hello to your boss, Mr. Smith, for me. I'll also put in a good word for you." For the first time, David spoke up. "What? How do you know his name?" My dad stood up, took a leather case from a drawer, and handed a piece of paper to David. "Emily didn't tell you. Allow me to introduce myself properly." The paper was my dad's business card. David's face turned pale as he looked at it. Then he shouted, I'm so sorry," and got off the couch, apologizing. "What? What's going on? Why are you apologizing?" David's workplace was one of my dad's many properties. In other words, my dad was at the top of the entire organization. I had always kept this a secret, even from David. "Wait, what's happening? Why is David apologizing? Show me that card." My Mill grabbed the card from David, and just like David, she turned pale. "This has to be fake. You must have taken someone else's card. Show me the real one. There's no way the father of such a useless girl could be more important than David." Looking her straight in the eye, my dad said calmly, "Feel free to check. But remember, this is a matter between Emily and David. The future of Emily and David is their decision. Mother and son are not a package deal. Do you understand?" Then, my dad placed a hand on David's shoulder, looked him in the eye, and spoke gently. "Let me tell you this. This is a matter between a married couple, and it has nothing to do with the company. I dislike using power or titles as leverage. I have no intention of causing you trouble at work. I'm speaking to you as a father who cares about his daughter. But you understand what you've done, right? As a handsome and successful man, you must know." David was frozen, unable to look away from my dad's intense gaze. After being stared at by my dad for a while, David finally spoke in a strained voice. "Why, yes." After that, our divorce was finalized surprisingly quickly. David, terrified of my dad's true identity, didn't argue with the lawyer and quietly signed the divorce papers. The lovely girl from a good family that my Mill mentioned didn't know David was married. When her parents found out, they demanded compensation from David. As my dad had promised, he didn't do anything to damage David's position at the company, and the situation wasn't made public. That should have been the end of it. But, driven by her love for her son, my Mill went off the rails. After discovering my dad's true identity, my Mill began to worry about David's future. She imagined that her beloved David would be shunned by everyone, and might even get fired with just a word from my dad. Every day, she would show up in the lobby of David's workplace, handing boxes of sweets to the confused receptionists, and introducing herself to everyone passing by, saying, "I'm David's mother." During lunch breaks, she would call David to the lobby and hand him a lunchbox with desserts, saying things like, "Make sure everyone at work likes you. If anything happens, tell me. Don't let that worthless girl beat you. You're a good boy and should get along with the bosses." Curious coworkers who talked to my Mill heard nothing but bad things about me. Rumors spread quickly, and David became known as a mama's boy who bullied his wife. Female employees wouldn't even look at him. Unable to eat lunch at his desk, he ended up eating quietly in a park. But this didn't last long. With his position weakened by his mother's actions, David finally quit his job. Despite my dad doing nothing, my Mill's rampage caused David to lose everything. Predictably, David then tried to win me back. "Emily, I need you. Only you understand me. Your loyalty is because you love me, right? I'll cut ties with my mom. The wall between us is gone. Aren't you happy? Ask your father for help. If you come back, everyone at work will understand. Don't abandon me, Emily. You're not that cold." My mom listened to this on speakerphone. My mom was furious, but I couldn't even muster the energy to be angry. I just chuckled lightly and hung up the phone. David kept calling for a while, but when I continued to ignore him, the calls eventually stopped. Just as I felt some relief, my Mill started bombarding me with calls. Since I had blocked her number, she started calling my parents' house. Her messages were filled with accusations like, "You and your devilish daughter have ruined my life. David, who was so kind and devoted to me, is now rebelling because of you." Despite being so scared of my Mill that hearing her voice used to make me dizzy, I wasn't afraid at all now. I didn't respond to her calls, just let her talk, and recorded everything in case I needed to use it later. My Mill was oblivious and kept spilling everything. She had no idea that she had destroyed David's position at work. She had no awareness that she was causing trouble for the company and making David's position worse. Instead, she genuinely believed that despite all she had done, it was all my fault that David quit his job and our relationship fell apart. David had become a recluse since leaving his job. The house must be a mess by now. During one of my Mill's calls, I heard David shouting in the background, "It's your fault Emily left me. Stop making these stupid calls and make dinner, you curse." After that, the call stopped for a bit, but then my Mill switched to a pleading tone. "Please help me. David yells at me every day. I'm scared. Please come back and let's start over. David will be kind again if you return. I miss those happy times when the three of us were together. I want to eat your delicious cooking again." When my mom, standing beside me, looked like she was about to say something, I stopped her. "You said my cooking was terrible and threw it away in front of me. Since I married into your family, I never felt happy. David must be happy now, free from the stress of having me around, and you should be thrilled to have your beloved David all to yourself. That's not." I cut her off and continued, "If David remarries, make sure he chooses someone who will gladly put up with you spying on their bedroom, throwing their cooking away, and bullying them together with you. If such a person exists." Wait, that's not what I meant. Mill tried to say something, but I hung up and disconnected the phone line. It was the first time I had spoken so firmly to my Mill. I wondered if things would have been different if I'd had the courage to do this sooner. But no, the result would have been the same. Just before I hung up, I heard David yelling at his mother again. The David who once worshipped his mother was now lashing out at her, like a small child throwing a tantrum when things don't go their way. Neither David nor my Mill ever apologized to me, not once. David apologized to my dad, but that was just to save himself. What will happen to them now? It's no longer my concern. I've been freed. With the help of my lawyer, I got a restraining order against David and my Mill, stopping their calls. Once my mind was at peace, I decided to move out and live on my own again. My parents were concerned, saying I didn't need to leave since my wounds hadn't fully healed, and I had a home here. They were also worried I might make another mistake in a relationship, but I was determined this time. This decision wasn't out of rebellion or stubbornness. I deeply appreciated my parents' love and concern. I wanted to stay and make up for the past, especially now that we understood each other better. Leaving again felt like a waste and made me sad. But if I stayed, I'd end up making the same mistakes again. I would rebel against my parents and go down the wrong path. Both my parents and I are getting older. I can't keep being a troublemaker. I want to give my parents real peace of mind. It's time to shed my sheltered past and grow up. Mom, Dad, I'm so grateful to you. Without you, I don't know where I'd be now. I'd have been swept away in that house without a will of my own. This isn't running away, it's growing up. And someday, I'll give you grandchildren. Thank you so much. My mom hugged me, crying, while my dad gently patted my head with a kind smile. Stop it, you too. How old do you think I am? I wanted to say it jokingly, but tears started to fall from my eyes. Marriage, divorce, living through a nightmare with David and my mill, it was all so dramatic. Honestly, at this point, I don't know if I'll ever be able to love someone again. I'm even scared to interact with older women, except for my mom. I haven't completely let go of my resentment towards them. Will there ever be a time when I can talk about it and laugh? But I need to become stronger and happy enough to wish David and my mill good fortune, because that would be the best revenge against them.